What's your goal of going on podcast interviews? I'd say most people don't want to go on there and make a fool of themselves. Most people, they want to be impressive. They want to be remembered. They want to be respected. They want people to go and say, wow, that person was amazing. But you know what? The people that really make an impact are those people that say, I want to have an interesting discussion. I want to be remarkable. And that's what I want to talk about today is that are you focused on podcast interviews to be impressive or remarkable? And let me explain this a little bit. Growing up 3 summers during college, I got to work at Los Alamos National Lab up in the mountains outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. At that time, Los Alamos had the most PhDs per square acre of any place in the world. It was an amazing, amazing place. And there were so many people walking around that often it was hard to pick out the janitors from the geniuses, right? There was often a lot of super, super smart people that looked a little bit disheveled, and you're looking at them and saying, wow, I wonder if they're the janitor or the genius. And oftentimes the janitors, great people and everything, but actually they looked more put together, more impressive. And somebody pointed out to me how you could tell the difference. And I want to share the same thing with you. He said, you can always spot the difference between a janitor and a genius by the questions they ask. Now, what does this mean on a podcast? Well, let's look at this. You'd go to Los Alamos and you'd run into somebody and they had the answer for everything. They would tell you exactly how something was done. You should do this. If you had an opinion on a car, they would tell you exactly what this was. And, they had it all right. And they would tell you they were the expert on it. And they would spend time telling you why they were the expert because they did this, they owned this many of the cars, or they knew the best restaurants in town because they had lived there, they had been to them all, and they would make sure that you left, that you were impressed by them, that you knew that they were an expert. But you know what? You didn't remember them that much, right? They were impressive. Maybe you thought they were an expert. Maybe you thought they were a know-it-all. Maybe you thought, I don't know who this person is, but I'll probably forget him shortly after. And I think about this at podcast interviews I've gone to, conferences that I've gone to, the person that's going to give me the 10 hacks, the 10 secrets that you must do. And they've done all of this. And half the presentation is on who they are and what they've done and what makes them an expert. And then the next half of it is, these are the 10 things that you must do. And, I'll admit, sometimes I'll take down some notes and that was interesting. I'll do that. But chances are when I leave that presentation, or when I leave listening to that podcast, I probably don't think about it. They were trying to be impressive, but they became forgetful. They definitely weren't remarkable in that I didn't remark on them. I didn't talk about them afterwards. So maybe that's the expert or the janitor on a podcast interview. So what's the genius? You can spot the genius by the questions they ask, by the questions they pose, by do they get you thinking about new things, about different ways of looking at the world or different ways that the future might change from what we have known in the past. They're not giving hacks. They're not giving the top 10 lists that you won't remember, but they're posing a question that's really going to change the way you look at things. And it's a question that you can't just go to Google and say, what's the answer to this question? No, these are deeper questions. And I think of people like Seth Godin. I love Seth Godin. I would not miss any of his keynotes. And I can't say that I've ever, written down the 10 steps, the 5 hacks to do anything. But you know what? I leave his talks with questions and things to think about and things to talk about. And too often now, I think that we go into podcast interviews trying to impress. We impress because we've got this bio. We want to get in there that we've done this and we've done that. And we've got this all things figured out. And if you only do the 5 hacks that we tell you, you'll have nirvana too. Honestly, I think that's forgettable. You start off to try to be impressive and you become forgettable. To me, especially on podcasts that are evergreen content, that are out there for time, I think the most powerful ones are those questions. The questions that people say is how they look at the future. Questions on insights that they have, putting things together. Data, facts today, they're plentiful and cheap. Experts today are plentiful and cheap. But those people that cause us to think, cause us to see new insights, those are the ones that are valuable. And I'd also say those are the ones whose podcasts go viral. Now, you may say viral in downloads, like a video. I'm like, no, there's a different type of viral. And let me explain this from the man that I learned it from. Bix Bixen, great futurist. He has helped big companies like Starbucks and Microsoft. And I was talking with him one time, and he was a client of ours. And I talked about, the conversation that goes on between the host and the guest. And he let me finish, and he said, that is just a small fraction of the conversation that goes on. And I was lost. And he explained that, well, most of the conversation that goes on is between the listener and the host and the guest. You listen to the podcast and you think, I don't agree with that. I'm going to try this. I wonder if they ever thought about this. It's a conversation inside your head. And he said those rare podcasts, those podcasts that truly go viral are the ones where that question comes in to other conversations. And you can always pick out someone that's a podcast listener. Most of the time, the conversation starts with, I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about this. And it's always about an idea, right? Nobody says, I was listening to a podcast the other day and they talked about the 10 hacks to do this. And I've got them all written down. You should write them down too. No, it's typically a big idea and how it impacts your life. And one example I've got of this is I remember listening to a podcast and this guest had talked about that the world had changed, right? It was not a world of scarcity anymore. It was a world of abundance, right? We've got abundant choices. We've got abundant calories. We've got abundant customers. The world has changed. And I remember talking with a friend of mine, Christopher Lockhead, and I said, I was listening to this guy and he had this idea and it was really amazing. And Christopher stops and he goes, was that Mike Maples Jr.? And I'm like, yes, that's his name. He goes, dude, that was my podcast. And I'm like, all right, proves I listened to your podcast, proves I didn't remember where I heard it from, but I have been talking about that idea nonstop. So when you go on a podcast, if you want to be impressive, fine. Talk about yourself, talk about the 5 hacks, the 6 things to do, and you'll be impressive, but you'll also be forgotten. If you want to be remarkable, if you want to go viral, talk about big ideas, talk about questions that you have, observations that you have. Let's start thinking together, having better questions and better discussions. In the end, we're all one conversation away, not one funnel away. Let's make this conversation interesting.